Thank you for joining us. And today we're going to be having a discussion about what is maladaptive daydreaming, because I think there's a lot of room to really clarify this. And with me today, I have Glenn San Juan, who is a hypnotherapist who focuses on such things as smoking cessation, addiction, weight loss, and maladaptive daydreaming.
Hey everybody, nice to see you all here. I'm with Nicole Vetter, content creator and former maladaptive daydreamer.
And so I thought we would just kind of start with the definition. So I was doing a
Yeah,
little bit of research this weekend, and I found a website that's called the Maladaptive Daydreaming Center. And they have a lot of resources, highly recommend it. We can link to it down below. And so their definition of maladaptive daydreaming is as such. It is defined as an extensive fantasy activity that replaces human interaction and or interferes with academic, interpersonal, or vocational functioning.
it's pretty wide scope, right?
It is definitely a very wide scope. Additionally, findings demonstrate that maladaptive daydreaming differs significantly from normative daydreaming in terms of quantity, content, experience, controllability, distress, and interferes with life functioning. And so I feel like that really defines my experience of it. And I would really love to hear in a moment about, the people that you've worked with on this. But
Yeah,
so as I was looking through these resources this weekend, one of the things I found was a scale about, do you qualify for maladaptive daydreaming?
hmm
And one of the questions was, if you get interrupted while you're maladaptive daydreaming, does that upset you? And I had to really
yeah,
think about that. I don't know that I've ever been upset by someone stopping me, but for me, it was just, I was in that world so extensively for such a long period of time that it never stops for me. I was living kind of both worlds at the same time. And that was kind of one of the reasons I wanted to stop, because I wanted to be present. I wanted to be here and live my best life.
sure.
But but for me, really, it was just constant daydreaming. Um, and so what does that kind of look like, right? Because that's what this is leading to is, so for me growing up, I kind of grabbed onto a lot of films. And from my understanding, a lot of people who do maladaptive daydreaming, they, do focus on like Hollywood and celebrities and, films, while other people definitely
Yep.
create their own worlds, which sounds super fascinating to me. But
hmm
I totally caught that like Hollywood bug. I think one of the first things I ever, engaged in maladaptive daydreaming with was The Little Mermaid.
Sure.
And it's definitely this, things get very fuzzy, and you're here, but you're also not here. And you're just engaging with, for me, it was very immersive. I was engaging with, characters that I had, essentially taken and, reused it for my own purposes.
Yeah,
Um, it's really interesting, like trying to explain this now. It's really difficult because it was, for me, it was almost more like imaginary friends, because it was just so immersive,
sure.
but I did have those moments of just daydreaming, like when I was in high school and I would sit in class and get super distracted and not be able to pay attention, which is something the definition mentioned.
Sure.
It was really difficult to pay attention in class because I would just be super daydreaming about whatever triggers from the night before, and triggers can include music. For me, it was, films and anything kind of along that line of Hollywood.
Yeah,
Um, but I would love to hear your experience with everyone that you've talked to. What have they kind of spoken about it as being like?
sure. And I mean, it's funny how you mentioned The Little Mermaid because when, when you're a kid, your imagination's going wild. I
Yeah.
mean, most kids out there, whether it's playing with Legos, whether they're playing with whatever toys, dolls, whatever, or even just thinking about what's on TV, that's part of their imagination. And that's kind of expected. Like everybody kind of expects that with out of kids.
Yeah.
And I want to say that what you see is that majority of people do grow out of that. This
Right.
people start having responsibilities. You got homework as you go into high school, or as you go into college or after college, you would have a job that you have to get your work done. And I think there's a lot of people that normally they just go into that. They go into that mode.
Yep.
But then there's a lot of individuals that will be still stuck in their daydreams, or like they've had that motive, so they've had it for so long.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah,
I remember you just mentioned that it was really hard for you to think back, because I mean, it goes back way, like,
yeah,
you know, at least 20 years to when you were thinking about the Little Mermaid. For a lot of people out there, they've been daydreaming like when they were younger,
mhm,
and then it just kind of goes away later on. But it's kind of that comfort that people have of just having that world that they knew it can go however way they wanted to.
right,
And then so when they see it, and then but it isn't like a problem until later on when they actually find out, oh, this is interfering with my work. This
right.
isn't interfering with how I want to have a relationship with somebody else. And so that shows up in how it
And
comes
it is
about later.
interesting, because now that you're talking about, people kind of growing out of it, for me, I don't know that I kind of grew out of it, but I did get to the point where after college, I did end up in a pretty serious relationship for about a year. And
Yeah,
at that point, I did stop. And it was kind of easy to stop. It wasn't,
sure.
I don't remember having to like put in the same kind of effort that I'm doing now,
Yeah,
but I definitely, like, I was 100% in that relationship. That was my focus. It was my everything. And I did
sure.
stop. And I remember after we broke up, that kind of also broke me. And I really struggled. And then I eventually kind of went back to maladaptive daydreaming. But I also remember it being difficult to go back to maladaptive daydreaming,
Sure.
where I had to kind of remember how to do all these things again and like engage that, like, imagination. I don't know,
Sure.
but I was struggling after that breakup.
Sure.
I feel like that relationship taught me how to drink, which is really horrible, but it's true. So then I was doing a lot of drinking and I was really trying to cope with a lot of stuff that I wasn't really dealing with properly. I was trying to push all the emotions under,
Yeah,
and it got me back into maladaptive daydreaming.
sure.
Um, so yeah, but at the same time, I'm at this point now where I have dealt with my emotions and my trauma and I've done my learning and my processing. And it's been kind of this natural progression of, I don't know that I need this going forward, right?
Sure.
So, but I definitely still understand that, a lot of the response that I get for sure is, I love maladaptive daydreaming. I don't want to give it up, right?
Yeah,
And how difficult it is. And I think one of the interesting things in the definition that I read said, the controllability of it is really difficult,
yeah,
and me just talking earlier about I was so immersive. I was always in it, to think that I wasn't in it for a moment is kind of insane.
sure. That's the thing, when you're in when you're in a bad like relation, or like when you have a bad breakup, or something does traumatic happen in your life, whether you're younger or whether it happens in your adulthood, there's usually some sort of coping mechanism
Right.
that a lot of times your brain will either try to search it out, or it will go back to what it knows.
Yeah.
And what better than daydreaming, right? It's
Yeah.
free. I mean, I mean, you mentioned about how you found alcohol, but for some people, let's say they were younger, let's say they're at the end of the age, or didn't
Mhm.
have access to some sort of drug that they wanted.
Right.
Well, no one's gonna know that you're in your room daydreaming, walking in circles, or
Right. And as a child,
banging
you
your
have
head.
access to that, right?
Right. And it's I mean, it's easy. I mean, it's always been there,
Yeah.
and you can have it however way you want.
Right.
And so now, as individuals become adults, it's hard to break that habit, especially if you haven't let go or reconciled whatever has happened to you in the past.
Which is really interesting because so I've stopped maladaptive daydreaming about, I think, 7, 8 months now.
Hmm.
And I so I did it as I moved because I kind of wanted that clean slate because
Sure.
I figured the associations with my new space would be different and it would kind of help.
Hmm.
And I wasn't even aware for the first 3 months of how I really, all those things that I was using maladaptive daydreaming to cope with, I
Hmm.
then started using food as a coping mechanisms instead,
Sure.
and I was like eating out like crazy, and the price difference is very maladaptive
Yeah,
daydreaming is
yeah.
cheaper. But yeah, definitely interesting, and then I think I did a video on this on TikTok the other day about how I was kind of shocked by, like, I thought I would have to do all the healing to stop maladaptive daydreaming. I didn't think that maladaptive daydreaming in itself, that once I gave it up,
Mhm.
that all these kind of things would bubble up. And that's what I've really been experiencing lately is,
Yeah,
memories from childhood and flashbacks and, nightmares. And it's been really interesting to be like, oh, wow, okay, there is more to do, and I think that was a lot of the stuff that I was coping with, was
sure,
trying to cope with. And this was just how I figured out how to do it when I was super young. And that's what
sure.
worked.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I mean, because I mean, when you're super young, I mean, it comes naturally, right? It's just part of, your parents let you go play off and do whatever, and you use whatever is around you.
Yeah.
And so it's easy to carry it on, even
Right.
until you're into your 30s, 40s, you see people in their 60s that are, slowly holding on to those. But that's the problem. It's holding them back still from what they really want to do.
Yeah. And you kind of just touched upon something which I think really hits home for me is,
Yeah.
your parents kind of send you off like, go play.
Hmm.
Because as I was looking at resources for maladaptive daydreaming and research this weekend, I think one of the things that always hits home for me is that it's very much a lot about loneliness, right? So
Yeah.
if you're not getting your needs nurtured, it's going to be a lot easier. You just, those are just natural needs. You're going to want to fill them.
Right.
And whether you create characters that help you fill those needs, or
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess it's filling it. And I feel like that was really the thing for me because I feel like my parents didn't really have the capacity to take care of me when I was a child.
Sure.
And I really was just left alone to my devices for most of my childhood. That's really how I remember it,
Sure.
versus like engaging with me, playing with me. Um, and I think one of the first definitions I read with maladaptive daydreaming was very much along those same lines is,
Hmm.
it's a way of coping with loneliness, trauma, and abuse.
Hmm.
Um, and I feel like that was like, oh, okay, I'm
Yeah.
understanding now, like this is what I'm trying to kind of deal with and cover up.
Sure.
Um, but
And
I
what's
feel,
worse is,
mm,
oh, I was just going to say that what's worse is that when you're in your daydreams, the funny thing is, I mean, you daydream about having relationships, or whether they're real or not real. But the
mhm,
problem is that it takes away even more from reality. You're
yes,
spending more time by yourself, which
right,
makes you feel more lonely. You're thinking of that more. So it becomes a vicious cycle
absolutely.
where it comes to the point where that's why it got coined as maladaptive daydreaming.
Right. And that was probably the number one reason is I wanted to be part of a healthy relationship.
Yeah.
And I knew that I couldn't put in the time and effort that I wanted to if I continued maladaptive daydreaming. So for me, it was really important to, continue the healing process and give it up, but I'm also a believer that when you give stuff up, you get stuff back.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I definitely feel like, while giving up maladaptive daydreaming has been really difficult, I've gotten a lot back. So
Yeah.
I think also the time that
Hmm.
you put into this, I think, in the last call we had, I talked
Hmm.
about, just getting lost in time, you know,
Yep.
uh, or other people that I know that, it's impossible for them to do well in school. And someone I know, people thought they had a learning disability, but they couldn't track it down.
Sure.
Well, this is essentially a learning disability because you can't really, similar to ADHD, you can't focus, you can't give, your everyday real like life your full presence. So
Right.
yeah.
And I mean, that's the thing. It's because I mean they talk a lot about like solutions for how to help with maladaptive daydreaming. It
Yeah.
is all about being mindful
Hmm.
of like kind of because I mean everyone's got to do some inner work, especially
Right.
if they're trying to get over whether it's an addiction, whether it's a phobia or something. There has to be some inner work that needs to be done
Yeah.
that you need to discover for yourself so you can find what you actually want.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I will say it's been a really interesting journey getting to this point where I did really feel like, okay, I don't need this coping mechanism. I
Hmm.
can give it up.
Sure.
I'm willing to, live life and deal with the things that are really scary.
Right.
But that was a long journey.
Of course. And I mean that's the thing, but that's where a lot of people they're concerned that this is something they're going to be stuck with for the rest of their lives. I
Yep.
mean, it's not like cigarettes or alcohol where you can just, if you run out of money, you can't buy either of them. So you're kind of like stuck unless you have to bum it from somebody else. But whether you're maladaptive daydreaming, that's all in your head. You can do it as long as you want with as much time as you have. So that way, there's a lot of people that feel like they are stuck, that this is going to be their reality. But it's
Yeah.
about just taking yourself to that next level. Be willing to actually step out of your comfort zone so you can actually make that change and find something different for yourself, which it
Yeah.
sounds like you were able to do for yourself.
Yes, I was. It's really interesting because I've been thinking back to like what was my thought process in giving up maladaptive daydreaming, and like how did I think I was going to cope with it once I got here and I
Yeah.
gave it up?
Yep.
Because there was the first, 4 months, there was a lot of difficult emotions that came up.
Sure.
Um, and sadly, at that moment, I didn't have a therapist that I could really work through that with. Now I
Hmm.
do, and that's really great. And that's really been
Sure.
life changing. But um, having the right support to kind of deal with those emotions as they come up. I mean, the first 4 months, emotions were coming up, but I didn't even know what they were. I couldn't identify them. I didn't know what I was
Yeah.
upset about. I'm just crying
Sure.
and like grieving. And I'm like, what am I upset about? Am I upset
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
my loss of my characters? Am I upset about my childhood trauma? I don't even know.
Hmm.
Now I kind of understand it a little bit more, but it was definitely an interesting experience for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, it's different for everybody too. I
Yes.
mean, and also, as you mentioned earlier, do they really want to give it up? Are
Right.
they ready to give it up? Because a lot of these relationships that they've had in their head.
Right.
I mean, there's something about that security that they are
There.
always going to be there.
Yes. And I think that's a good marker for people to tell whether they're ready to give it up. And I think it's
Hmm.
fine. Like everyone's on their own journey, however
Yep.
long it takes you, it's what takes, but when people respond, I always respond back with, you're on your journey. There's no pressure. You don't have to give it up today. I'm just talking about my experience with
Hmm.
maladaptive daydreaming and giving it up.
Yeah.
And I think we always say like, oh, people think like, oh, I have to give up maladaptive daydreaming. It's like, no, 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 hold on. Think about all the other things that you deal with, right? Because I mean, the interesting thing is most mental health disorders, like ADHD, for example, it is
Yeah.
oftentimes linked to depression and anxiety. And a lot of things are, right? So
Hmm.
it might be something that you start with dealing with that depression or anxiety if that's something you're experiencing.
Sure.
And then, once you've dealt with that, it becomes a lot easier to continue on the path where at some point you might be like, I don't need maladaptive daydreaming. I feel okay,
Yep.
but I feel like those two, the depression, anxiety are like those, top tiers of like, this is a lot of discomfort. How do I get rid of this?
Yep.
So
That coping mechanism. I mean,
yes,
what better way than to just use something that's free?
exactly.
And nobody needs to know about it, as opposed to someone can smell cigarette smoke on you, or someone knows that, like, wow, it looks like you gained some weight or something because you've been just craving sugary foods all the time or something like that.
Right.
So I think that's where a lot of people don't realize that maladaptive daydreaming is a thing, because,
Right.
it's it's a normal thing to just daydream, but it's that to that extent of like is it really?
Yeah.
How bad is it really interfering with your life and
And
getting you where you want to be?
I think that was the other thing that I think we wanted to touch upon is telling maladaptive daydreaming apart from other things like ruminating thoughts and anxiety, because
Yeah.
like with my experience with trauma, I've had those experiences where I'm so in like my nervous system is so fight or flight, and I'm so worked up that I will ruminate on a situation where I'm kind of like almost daydreaming about a fight I'm having with someone before the fight's even happened, right? Because
Yeah.
your body's trying to protect you. It's like, if I
Sure.
plan this out, when it happens, I'll be safe, right? And
Hmm.
so I think those types of, situations, or even anxiety, I think anxiety or sometimes OCD also can kind of put you in those situations where you're creating scenarios that haven't happened, and some people might confuse that with maladaptive daydreaming. And
Sure.
while I've experienced both, they're very different to me.
Yeah.
With maladaptive daydreaming, it's a very consistent storyline that I've created, that
Hmm.
I'm super engaged with,
Sure.
but those types of ruminating thoughts or creating scenarios, during anxiety, those are usually shorter term things,
Hmm.
where like that anxiety, um, I don't want to call it, it's not an anxiety session. It's, like that time frame of like really high anxiety when something really stressful is happening. That might
Sure,
last 3 days to a week, right? But
sure,
um, but a lot of my relationships with my characters have lasted years, which is so
sure.
interesting to say. But yeah, so how have you experienced people talking about that?
I mean, I guess going back to when it comes to the anxiety or like depression, I mean, you have individuals who, I mean, everyone's a little bit different, right? Everyone will internalize it their own way,
Mhm.
whether, like you mentioned, whether it is OCD. Because I mean, people who have OCD, like especially if it's, let's say they have to have everything clean or whatever, right? There's usually a reason for that.
Yes.
They don't want to get sick, or they don't want to, or they everything needs to be like in the right place.
Right.
Otherwise, I might not be able to find anything. They want to prevent those feelings of anxiety or depression. Or or like in the case with maladaptive daydreaming, it could be that it happens automatically, but it also could be hiding what's actually going on, feeling lonely. Shoot, I wish I had like some friends to actually hang out with. Or I wish I could have cultivated that relationship with my parents a little bit better. How that ideal relationship be. And so maybe it wouldn't be as maybe as obvious as something that's like OC. I don't want, I guess that's for lack of better words, obvious, but it's subtle with maladaptive daydreaming, especially
Right.
how you can just easily ease into that world
Right.
that you've been doing for decades,
Right.
that your mind is just naturally attuned to just going in that direction. Because why not? You know?
Right. And I will say, when I was experiencing a lot of those anxious thoughts I had a lot of anxiety for a very long period of time. I didn't even know I had anxiety. I didn't associate those thoughts with anxiety or understand what it was, but
Hmm.
there was, I would create ridiculous scenarios in my head about, things that were never going to happen. It would never happen, but
Sure,
my body was just in that fight or flight.
sure.
And
Wants to defend itself.
yeah, and it was really interesting getting to that point where I was like, oh wow, how did I get here in this thought
Hmm.
process? But with maladaptive daydreaming, it's like I want to be there, even
Hmm.
when I'm creating chaos there, because that's really what you're comfortable with, is the chaos. So
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah. It's
Uh,
amazing where your mind will take you.
oh, it's very amazing where my mind will take you. But thank you all for joining us today. If you do have any topics that you'd like us to discuss or answer any questions, please put that in the comments. We will, of course, link to the resources and to each of our respective, social media and ways to access us and our content. And
Yep.
once again, my name is Nicole Vetter. I'm a content creator on YouTube and TikTok.
And once again, I'm Glenn San Juan, hypnotherapist, and I help everyone with their hypnotherapy needs.
Thank you.